we don't merely deal with theories and with models, but what we do research on is what other people live through. It's basically other people's lives. And no matter if we know them personally or not, it still affects us. And we always know that what we do or also what we don't do has a direct or indirect effect on these people's lives. And this is also the reason why a setback in our research, or even being in a deadlock in that sense, can be especially challenging, so to say. But this is not the only way this affects us. Another way is also that we get affected by doing the work we do, in that sense that we get in touch with those who are victims of what we're doing research on. Scientific studies have shown that by engaging with these victims, researchers are in danger to suffer second-degree trauma. And sometimes researchers are not only in danger of suffering second-degree trauma, but by either being victims themselves or by the circumstances the fieldwork is conducted under. Researchers also additionally suffer from trauma, first-degree trauma. So no matter in what degree we are affected by it, if we are in touch with the people personally, if we do research on it, if we suffer first-degree or second-degree trauma, we all are confronted with unbearable pain and hardship on a regular basis, so to say. And it's a regular part of the profession we all choose. Although there are numerous debates going on and articles out on researching trauma and researching human rights, talking about the trauma that researchers may suffer from is still very much in the starting. So we need this debate, it is important, and which is why I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity today and for this lovely group of researchers that is part of the conversation today. First, we have Alicia Yamin, who is teaching both law and public health medicine at Harvard, as well as being a senior advisor on human rights and health policy at the global health justice organization Partners in Health. With her globally renowned transdisciplinary work, she has bridged academia and activism. Not only has she published numerous articles and monographs, with the revised and expanded second edition of her monograph, When Misfortune Becomes Injustice, Evolving Human Rights Struggles for Health and Social Equality, just having been published a month ago. Also, she has been working as independent expert and advisor to numerous local, national, and international bodies and organizations, such as the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank, as well as regularly providing testimony and guidance to tribunals and legislative bodies around the globe, as well as amicus curiae briefs on issues regarding the application of international law and comparative law to health and sexual and reproductive rights. But very important for our conversation today also, Alicia is a professional who is truly outspoken and vocal and honest about the emotional part of the job and her experience in sharing this, which I appreciate very much, and which is why I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today with her. Then we have Davi Málaga, who holds a bachelor in law and a master in administration from the Federal University of Viçosa in Brazil, and is currently a PhD candidate in administration at the same university. Currently, he is a guest researcher at the Faculty of Law at the University of Bergen, which he has been since September of last year. He studies topics related to imprisonment, prison policy, and politics, and specializes in qualitative research and has done fieldwork by conducting a number of interviews about trauma related to his field of expertise. I am Dorothee Alberts. I'm currently working with LawTransform, and as part of my work, I am basically focusing on transitional justice, both in current times and also in a history or historical point of view. So to start off the conversation, I would like to share or ask you to share maybe your point of view on a matter. So if we have the two poles of the wide range of how we can address this topic and how we can engage and react to these emotions. So one pole, I would say, succumbing to a numbness almost, and the other pole being emotionally on edge. So how can we make sure to not be overcome by our emotions in that way that they tear us apart, but also to not suppress our emotions, be it when we engage with people who live through it, be it when we engage with researchers, or be it just in front of our computer or books or whatever in our own apartment or our office space.
So, hello everyone. First, I would like to say a few words. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. It's my first time being on a panel like this, and I'm very thankful for being here with Alicia and with Dorothee. And about trauma specifically, a very useful way of dealing with the amount of emotions that might stem from a contact with specifically my field, which is imprisonment. It's a very hard process to do. We mainly, when we're in contact with realities that are very harsh and are very complicated, such as realities in prison, for example, and specifically Brazilian prisons, we have we face a number of injustices and a number of problems that might affect us very harshly. And I think this stems from the empathy side of things, as we end up relating with our research participants and the situation itself. And it can be tough. It's also not something from experiences, it's not something we learned in one day to another. It's a process and it takes time to learn how to deal with those things. One useful way I found about this is to try and channel this. Channel all the indignation, channel all the bad feelings into creativity, and either share it with someone else and try to talk about this as we're doing it right now, or channel it into my work, writing stuff about things and addressing problems in a way not to let it overwhelm me. That's the main objective of this. It also helps with productivity. At least for me, I think it's just important for you not to let it overwhelm you, which is easier said than done.
So first of all, I'm very humbled to be on this panel. I know a lot of people in this room who could probably speak just as eloquently about these issues. I have been doing this work for a very long time. So when I began, when I graduated from law school, I had a fellowship and I went to Mexico, and I was bringing cases against the Federal Judicial Police, which are like the Mexican FBI. Neither then nor now known as a law enforcement agency that follows procedures. And I really didn't know what I was doing, right? I mean, I got married. Literally the first day I was at work, we were going to morgues in Mexico City. I was detained multiple times. I was imprisoned. Our house was ransacked. Our car was ransacked. I was followed. I was harassed. And and I was dealing with people who were tortured to death or tortured very close to death. And I didn't really appreciate how that was affecting me at the time. We didn't really talk about things like that then in the human rights field. We didn't, there were no sort of therapy services or anything like that. And it was only over years and time that I sort of started to realize how I had been affected after multiple experiences, and really probably only by seeing other colleagues. I later, much later, became director of research and investigations at a group called Physicians for Human Rights. And we were kind of at the forefront of doing investigation on the enhanced interrogations by the US during the second Gulf War. And it was then that I saw the colleagues who I was working with and how they had secondary trauma, that I began to piece together how, what had happened to me, I think. Although I have to say that the experiences in those first years in Mexico were clearly traumatic, and this sounds kind of funny in a way, but were clearly traumatic to my husband, who ended up going into law enforcement because he saw, he felt so, I mean, it sounds in a way ridiculous when I say it out loud, but he felt so helpless with respect to what was going on with me. And then people who I worked with closely, who were close friends of mine, were murdered in Mexico, that he then went into law enforcement. So I didn't really understand that at the time either. It took me a very much longer to understand that.
Yeah, especially this, seeing your whole surroundings in a certain way as well, your friends, your family. This is also what I'm sometimes wondering as well myself is how much to include them. Of course, if they are part of the daily life, they will be included. If not, sometimes even some researchers tell that they feel misunderstood talking to their relatives because they might not know what you're talking about and might feel more understood talking to other peers in a certain way. But of course, this takes a whole different direction then as soon as you take your family with you to the certain places, which in many times, especially changing country, changing workplaces will be inevitable in that certain way. Have you both figured out how to balance this for you then, that it doesn't affect you in an emotional way, knowing that not, or let's put it that way, maybe not feeling guilty for dragging your family into this, and more appreciating in that sense that you know you can talk about the topics?
Right. I mean, now again, I've been doing this for a very long time, so we've been married for a very long time too, and we do talk about it, and things have happened over time. He also has experienced, I mean, he himself has experienced working at, for example, when we lived in Peru, a bomb went off in a shopping center, and he was, picking through the bodies, and like both of us have experienced trauma. And I think probably, honestly, we're both, and I said this to somebody earlier, I think, we're all in many ways broken, and it depends on how we decide to put together the pieces.
Yeah. Davi, do you have figured out, of course, you're the same as me at a junior stage of researching, but have you figured out for yourself some strategies in that sense, how to deal with your own pain you go through regarding the field work or the work, in that sense that it helps you talking with your family members or your friends, or rather with other peers or anything?
Well, I think it's important to make a distinction about sharing this with people that are not on academia and with people that I work with. I find the people that I work with are way easier to share things with, specifically on thorny topics. But I don't very much do it at home. It's as if I created kind of a barrier between myself and my family. It's not that I don't try to expose some opinions, but I come from a place where some members of my family and extended family might not agree on some visions that I have, specifically on incarceration. And sometimes it's not even an option to share. Sometimes the only people that I have to talk about this is people who work with me or do study similar topics. And it limits a bit the way I have to deal with these topics of trauma through sharing specifically.
And usually when you hear self-care, nowadays it is oftentimes focused on a very like personal approach, be it therapy, be it different strategies, breathing strategies or anything. Have you both, of course, like if you don't want to share because it's so personal, I totally understand it, but have you both experienced in that sense that you feel like maybe it's more helpful for you the approach talking to people or including people in your emotions and experiences, be it either academics or people from your private circle? Or would you say for you it helps more being in a secluded place, maybe talking to a therapist or maybe doing breathing exercises or whatever there is to get closer to dealing with it? I guess to a certain extent, we will never completely free ourselves from some memories in a certain way. We will get through this profession, but still to at least get some ease.
So I guess I can go first. I mean, my goal is not to free myself of memories. I've done human rights work, and I've also witnessed trauma in what is not traditionally considered human rights work, but it would be considered public health work. But I think it also involves witnessing trauma. And I mean, I have had therapy, but not for this. I think, in fact, the genesis for this conversation was, how do you get through this? And the way I've gotten through it for so many years is by finding other people who've had similar, not necessarily identical, but similar experiences, and with whom to share this, and who actually care. And the goal is not to free ourselves and to forget, but because the reason we do this work is because it matters, because we do care. So.
Well, I find that dissociating a bit from the how do I say it? What I think stress is a big factor in this, and when I'm too close to the subject I'm studying or I'm too into the work I'm doing, it starts to become a problem. And that's the point that I usually go and get away from it for a bit by respecting the rhythm of rest and try to dissociate for a while. And talking helps in the long term, but sometimes you just need to get away from this for a bit and calm down. This is a very important thing I've noticed. And distracting the mind usually helps a lot. I believe academic work and intellectual work in general, you can't force it so much, you can't push it beyond your limits, because then it starts being a problem. Stress starts piling up, trauma is bound to happen and get worse as things go on. So talking helps.
Yeah, I guess this is very the common topic we all have here in that sense, really talking about the issues, addressing them, especially with those who, as Alicia said, where we know they care and they know that the matter is important. Is this also what helps you get through some deadlock at work sometimes? If you realize specific topics, maybe you want to work as an activist or as a researcher, but you realize that maybe there are some closed doors you need to encounter, or some material is not accessible, or some close friends or people you have worked with die. Is this also then what helps to go through these phases?
Well, I guess for me, it puts things in perspective. You know, I mean, it makes things, some of the issues at universities and tenure questions and things somewhat silly, because this is what matters and this is why I do this work. And what is important to me really is protecting the people whose real suffering and trauma I am witnessing, and doing something for them, not extracting information for the purpose of writing a paper or publishing or whatever. So that, I think, is a deep concern when there's some risk that arises. That is deeply troubling.
Also, I would like to talk a bit more about this situation. You mentioned the interaction as extracting information specifically, but I find that when trauma is involved, it's usually a deal breaker, especially on qualitative interviews, which is my preferred method of choice. When I see that the person starts getting uncomfortable, they start getting near to a focal point on their trauma, it usually is something that goes south really fast. And this is very important in connecting with the interviewee. It's something that nobody wants to speak with someone that gets uncomfortable with, or that touches on a subject that hurts them. And I think this needs to be said.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some people do want to express it, but we haven't talked a little bit about the context, about are IRBs actually worth it? Do they protect sufficiently? And in my view, they do not. That's usually a cover your ass type of thing. I think lots of Northern researchers who fly in and fly out of places and extract information and leave and tell themselves that, well, there are some kind of services that these people can get. That's ridiculous. So over the years, I mean, and that's different when you're doing academic study than when you're doing human rights advocacy research. But the number one priority is protecting the people who are sharing their stories and who are at risk, who are at greater risk, and trying to protect your colleagues who may be at greater risk.
Yes, so I would like to give the audience also the possibility for asking questions, so you can start lining up. And during that time, I would like to ask you, as the very experienced senior researcher, I guess this is already part of this, but from a junior researcher point of view, what kind of tip would you give? What would you give us on the way after this conference? Everybody will go to their countries again, in that sense, regarding, of course, as you said, number one, to protect those we work with, but also to protect ourselves in a emotional way.
Well, I think a lot of it is context specific. So, you know, it's very different if you're working in prisons than, say, in health systems, which can also be tremendously punitive. And one of the questions on the sheet that's written is, how do you protect people in publication? So I have exposed all kinds of things in health systems and made very clear, like gone back and made very clear that if there are retaliations from tenured physicians against, say, nurses or other kinds of lower cadre providers, that there are channels that they can register complaints through, and that I personally will be involved. And that has actually come to pass in Peru and elsewhere. So I think that's really, really important. It's also really important to remember you don't have to share everything in publication that you learn. There are lots of things that are enormously stigmatizing that might be interesting to reveal, but actually will not advance the research and can hurt people tremendously. So, you know, I think it's learning, it's understanding that anybody you talk to is a human being. So don't expect, you know, these people who come in and do research and expect people from communities to travel hours to go meet them in some public health center or something. It just boggles my mind that you can still treat people that way and then go away, and then they never get the research back, they never get the learnings back, they never get to criticize or find out whether actually you got it wrong. So I have started in all of the research that I do to raise more money to bring the research back to any community where I've been, to share it with them in a digestible way, and to have them have a chance to critique it, to have them have a chance to say, how should this be used in our particular context? Because they know a whole lot better than I do. But I think it's very extremely contextual. So that would, I don't know if I have one tip.
Yeah, if I may sum up the tip, maybe if I probably for everybody in a certain way, then to hold the human dignity as the first priority in a certain way, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. I will open up now the questions. Please just ask all the questions. If you address one of the two in like specifically, please let us know. And if not, I will ask you both when everybody has asked the question to just answer and chime in.
Thank you both. My name is Omar Bar. I want to hear you speak on 2 points. One you already have hinted, but I want to hear you talk about it a bit more directly, which is how we as researchers contribute to traumatizing the communities that we research. The other point is that we all work within academic disciplines, and what academic disciplines do is disciplining us in doing things a certain way, in being a detached observer, a detached writer, writing in an academic way that doesn't really allow us to address the trauma questions for both us and the communities that we research directly. So how do we move towards undiscipline ourselves to allow more room to address these questions? Thank you.
Hey, thank you for this wonderful panel. I'm Kirsten Hammond from University of Central Florida. So one question I have is, we have a lot of our graduate students dealing with conflict situations, victims of all sorts in conflict situations, genocide survivors. And as you mentioned, there are not a lot of resources for ourselves as researchers, but certainly to prepare our graduate students. Is there anything you could recommend or share that we could use to train our grad students to be able to handle these situations when they go out in the field? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cedar, and I teach at CSS in Mexico City. And it's a comment on the panel for you to react to. I teach on a postgraduate program in social anthropology, and I guess the line or the group that I work with is engaged activist anthropology. So most of our graduate students come because they're extremely committed to problematic issues in their countries. So we have students working, for example, doing their field work with victims of families have disappeared, searching for the disappeared, or on land occupations, or with trans migrants, all sorts of complex and challenging fieldwork scenarios. But we treat this very much as a collective of the group and a collective responsibility of us as teachers to accompany our students throughout. I'm very struck by this discussion being about the lone researcher and how the single researcher deals with this. And this is, in my view, not the right approach to take. We actually need to take collective responsibility in our workplaces for this. But we have, for example, ethical protocols that all of our students develop, right? Ethical protocols about even how you frame a research question, how you do the research, how you write up the research. So that's ongoing throughout. We have security protocols as part of our postgraduate program, and we accompany, obviously, we can't prevent bad things happening, right? But we can anticipate, and we must anticipate practically for our students. And then we have contention mechanisms, particularly when they come back from the field work, of working through collectively some of these issues. There are tons of resources about this, actually. The SSRN has a really great series on trauma, which is freely available online, and I can dig that out if people want. But there are a lot of, and there is a lot of discussion about a feminist politics of care and self-care as part of the academe. So, you know, I do think that it's a collective responsibility for all of us. It depends on your discipline and the space that there is in the disciplines for discussion, but I would like to hear your responses to some of that. Thank you.
Hi, so my question actually fits well as a follow-up to Rachel's point. I was gonna ask what you think about the role of ethics committees in this. And I'm Julia, I'm from Brazil. I'm a PhD candidate at FGV, but I also work as a contracted researcher at the school's Center for Racial Justice and Law. And just in 2022, we conducted a large qualitative research which involved reconstructing cases of police killings. A big part of this was interviewing the victim's family and friends. So we heard a lot of very traumatic, intense stories. It was required of us during the ethical clearance process that we all attend therapy provided by the institution. But I didn't have the sense that this was as meaningful a space as it was meant to be. It was kind of protocol. I don't know. So I was wondering if you think that that can be an effective way to deal with these things, and how do we make these protocols and evaluations about the real situation and not about institutional protection? And then just this is more of a curiosity, but I was wondering if either of you ever dealt with reflections on desensibilization of these things. And let me just explain. During that research, I accompanied many interviews with mothers who had lost their children during police killings and were awfully treated by the country's institutions. And in the end of the research, we did a launch for the report, and we had one of these mothers come, and well, several of them, but one of them testified, and it was very moving. A large part of the audience that was there was crying, and I realized that I wasn't, and it began to make me think if somehow being exposed to these things can harden your perception. And I guess, I mean, I think this is important work, and I want to continue, but I don't want to become someone that can hear a story like that and not, yeah, I think you get what I mean, but I was just wondering if you've ever come across this sort of reflection in your works, especially Alicia, who has had a long career and has told us about some very, very traumatic experiences. So it's just a question from a junior scholar to more senior ones. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Samah Khalafallah, and my question actually comes from a very personal experience while I was doing my research in Sudan. So I'm researching queer subjects in Sudan, Why my interlocutors are my friends and people whom I knew since ever. So in that position or situation, I was asked to detach myself, to distance myself from the people, from the materials I have. And I found myself in, for example, one of the interviews, one of my close friends were talking about some hardships they faced. So I was confronted of being emotional. I'll give my friend that support or just distance myself and be the researcher. So my question is how to deal with this, how to balance between positioning and distancing myself and how to be in a way, in the same time, I'm a very insider person. Another question or another thing is about the ethical considerations. So when researching queer subjects, it goes beyond the well-known ethical considerations for researchers. For example, if it goes beyond the consent, actually. So I can have the consent of my interlocutors to use their demographics and everything, but if that person is sharing, for example, how the queer movement in Sudan is using such a secure platform for communicating, I must not mention that to maybe, yeah, for further exposure, and that may cause like some threats from the state. So how to navigate this? Any tips or any suggestions? Thank you.
Thank you. Just a comment and a question. So the comment is that in my own work with communities and trauma, I actually find spiritual practice to be helpful in letting go of trauma, not so much therapy or talking about it. The question is that, you know, I said this in the panel, the starting panel about the debate on scholactivism and the role of the scholar and the role of the activist. And Ali, you've been a lawyer, human rights lawyer, the role of the lawyer as an advocate. So, we know that usually, although you can plead your own case before the courts, most people actually prefer to have somebody else advocate simply because that the detachment that brings from your own case actually helps you to be a better advocate. So on the one hand, we have the need for empathy and imagination in terms of being able to relate and bringing that out. But on the other hand, the need for detachment in order to actually advocate better. So how would you reflect on that? And relatedly, because I'm in the policy space, one of the things that I worry a little bit about is the fact that, I'm supposed to represent interests of different stakeholders if I'm actually advising on a particular policy choice. And then, but at the same time, the pull of such traumatic stories of communities and so on, obviously change my perception and my lens of looking at everything in a particular way. And while that might be the right way when I'm an advocate for those issues, but when I'm in the role of a person who's supposed to devise policy, how do I deal with that impact or bias in the way I'm approaching the issue? Thank you.
So that was a lot. Do you want to start?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I would like to address two things that were said, but across many of the questions. First one is about the detachment part, and this is just from my experience. I find very, very difficult to detach completely from the subject, and specifically, I found it even more difficult to sometimes adopt an objective standpoint in what I'm working on. But this, at least it's what I think, this is part of the job. We are not machines, we are human beings, and as such we are entitled to feelings. And we have to pay attention to this, but I don't know if we should be completely and all the time concerned with the form of the thing we're doing, but with the content itself.
So that was a lot. I guess first of all to Rachel. So I don't know how it came across, but none of this is ever done alone. Harvard, of course, has every kind of ethical protocol, security protocol, after the fact contention process. That's all in place. Do I think that's enough? No. I think most of it is cover your ass bullshit. But you know, it's there. Most human rights NGOs have their own training. So that's that. How do we create trauma? I think we do create trauma. I was part of this 4-country multi-methods study on intergenerational impacts of maternal mortality, and it was heavily based on the quantitative data from demographic surveillance sites, which, if you don't know, in public health are these areas where the people are periodically surveyed over and over and over again until they become sort of human population guinea pigs. And it's awful, and they feel used and utilized, and they certainly should feel used and utilized. And when it fully dawned on me in Ethiopia how bad it was, I said, well, what would you like from this? You know, what would you like to come out of this? And that kind of changed the channel and changed the story. But I think the way most universities, including my own, set this up is very exploitative, is very extractivist. And I think that's something we should all be conscious about in academic research on communities that are marginalized or in some way we're studying their suffering. Detachment, so, you know, I think it's different if you're litigating a case, in which case I think you do have to have considerable and maybe I'm deluding myself, detachment and be able to make careful legal arguments than if you're, say, documenting cases for a report for a human rights organization or something. And I certainly have been accused in the latter case of being too close. I've been told just many times I'm too close. I'm getting to know people too well. I'm too invested. I'm too emotional. And that's probably right, but that's kind of the kind of person I am. I think what happens, you know, when you feel like you just can't function anymore, then when you get numb, who was it who asked the question about desensitization? Yeah, I think that's a time to take a break. You know, if you're not crying with people at something that's you should be crying about, then that's the time to step away and take a break. And if you're not feeling what you should be feeling, that's saying something is wrong here, and you need to just have some space, because it's the feeling is part of it, right? I think that was it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also, our time is over now. Thank you all for the participation. I hope you will all get the chance in the coming days at the conference to get in touch even more with people. As we all said, talking about it is so important. It's a crucial part, and being surrounded by so many people dealing with the same issues, I think the Bergen Exchanges is the perfect platform in that sense. Thank you both so much, Alicia and Davi, for joining for this panel. And yes, so I'm looking forward to the other events and to talking with all you.